Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we request everyone to please join us in conference room 1. We will begin shortly. If you have not yet done so, kindly take a few minutes to speak to our volunteers to calculate and offset your carbon emissions. This can also be done by visiting the link you all received by email. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we request you to please join us back in conference room 1. Please take your seats and turn off your phones. We will begin shortly.
or less that I've ended up right front and center in a... Or is the ambassador nicely positioned himself? When I first came to I expected this to be something. It rotates, right? You pick a net each year, and then that's the starting point, and then you go to down the alphabet, and then we'll go around. And also we have this festival of Z6, but that makes Timor just. Yeah. Because otherwise we would be the third. Yes, that's true.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is called to order. It is an honor for me to introduce session 5. Where are we on the roadmap? In this session, we will assess the progress on the regional roadmap for implementing sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific and provide further guidance for the effective implementation of the regional roadmap, including through meaningful stakeholder engagement. Additionally, we will seek member states and stakeholders' views on modalities to strengthen regional follow-up and review through the regional roadmap. As we start the session, we will hear from the Secretariat on its assessment and observations on progress on the regional roadmap and the regional follow-up and the review. We will then hear from specially invited speakers who will share their perspectives, and we will hear perspectives from sub-regional organizations, from a development partner based in this region, and from major groups and stakeholders. Speakers in this session are His Excellency Semi Korela-Vesau, Minister of Fisheries of Fiji, His Excellency Kung Fuak, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for Socio-Cultural Community, Ms. Varuni Mutukamarana, Director of Education, Security and Culture, Secretariat of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, Mr. Jin Ho Song, Vice President of COICA, Mr. Akash Bafsar, Managing Director, SkyQuest Technology Group, Ms. Ranja Sengupta of the Third World Network. With this, I'm pleased to hand the floor over to the Deputy Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Mr. Kaveh Zahedi. Please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. To begin our discussions in session 5, where are we on the regional roadmap, we have put together a brief presentation for you. And the objective of the presentation, and indeed the objective of the session, is, first of all, to present progress on the roadmap itself, and second of all, to seek your feedback on the way forward in terms of priorities addressed through the roadmap, in terms of ESCAP's role in supporting implementation of the roadmap, in terms of how to align the regional roadmap review with the regional follow-up and review process itself, and finally, feedback on how to ensure meaningful stakeholder engagement. Allow me to begin with just a brief refresher introducing or reintroducing the roadmap to you. Many of you, or at least some of you, were with us on this journey where extensive dialogue between member states, inputs from civil society organizations and the broader UN community led to the development of the Asia and the Pacific Regional Roadmap for implementation of the 2030 Agenda. The roadmap was adopted in March 2017 at the 4th session of the APFSD. So here in the APFSD was where it was first adopted by our member states and then subsequently endorsed by the Commission session, our highest decision-making body here, in May of 2017. And the regional roadmap is, in fact, the only intergovernmentally agreed member state-driven regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda that reflects nicely the priorities of the member states of a given region, in this case, Asia-Pacific. So, how have we done in terms of implementation of the roadmap? You don't need to see all of the details. In fact, I can't see the details, even on my screen. But I think essentially you can tell from the greens, the yellows, and the oranges how well we are progressing along. So based on the ESCAP's analysis of SDG indicators that we undertake annually and that was released yesterday in the SDG Gateway, we show that progress on the implementation of the SDGs, of course, is mixed. And this is also reflected in the progress of the 11 priority areas of cooperation of the regional roadmap. And you see on your screen the 11 areas. So we've regrouped the SDGs or clustered them along the priorities that you identified for the roadmap. Based on the progress methodology that we have developed, the dashboard shows that implementation of all 11 priority areas of cooperation need acceleration. As the dashboard shows, most of the priority areas are showing mixed signs of progress, including technology and connectivity, including North, South, South-South, and international and regional partnerships. On finance, the region shows signs, in fact, of regressing in mobilizing additional financial resources for developing countries. And that's where you start to see some of the orange or red lights, red signals coming up. On the other hand, and we should recognize this, there are some signs of progress. Excuse me. Especially progress in leaving no one behind. Progress in terms of research and development of vaccines and medicines, in terms of capacity for managing health risks, in terms of numbers of qualified teachers, in terms of access to ICT. But the main message from our work is that significant data gaps still exist across the priority areas of cooperation. And that's what's shown in gray. So it gives us an indication of the direction we're heading. The green are good signals. We need to maintain that momentum. The yellow is where some acceleration is needed. The red or orange is probably where we need to reverse. But the gray shows you the vast amount of data that we still don't have to be able to more accurately monitor progress on the regional roadmap. And these significant data gaps exist in priority areas, including on disaster risk reduction, obviously absolutely vital for much of our region, including our Pacific SIDS, on climate change, on natural resource management, and even on energy. So much more work is needed to collect and define data and indicators to assess progress of the roadmap and, of course, to assess progress of the SDGs themselves. And beyond that, to then go into the disaggregated data that enables us to actually see what the Deputy Secretary General was saying. Who are we leaving behind? Where are they? And it's only through the disaggregation of that data you begin to uncover the story. In terms of progress of the regional roadmap, stakeholder engagement has also been an important part of the process. And of course, it's central to the theme of our APFSD this year. Significant steps have been taken at the regional level to involve stakeholders in the implementation of the priority areas that you defined for the roadmap. For example, the Secretariat is pioneering a partnership building initiative linked with the data and statistics priority area of the development of oceans accounts, something we know that countries like Fiji are particularly interested in support of SDG 14 on conservation and sustainable use of oceans, seas, and marine resources. Engagement processes can also be improved through capacity building and systematic approaches, better adapted to the 2030 agenda. In a way, we're still catching up with the kind of integrated agenda we have and the kind of higher level participation and partnership that it needs. In this regard, we, as your Secretariat, have worked with the International Association of Public Participation to develop training materials for the public and private sector responsible for stakeholder engagement in the context of the 2030 agenda. National and multi-country training workshops on stakeholder engagement were also delivered in a number of countries across the region. Kazakhstan was one, Indonesia was another. So this is just one example of how we're trying to develop the tools to make this stakeholder engagement for the delivery of your roadmap more systematic. A third area of stakeholder engagement is, of course, institutionalization of engagement, because it can help bring greater benefits, including, of course, in the UN. For our part, the Secretariat, we're working closely with civil society, such as the Asia-Pacific Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism, to reflect the voices of diverse stakeholder groups in the APFSD, in which you're sitting, and, of course, more broadly within the UN, we're pushing and engaged in more operational guidelines on engaging public through our efforts across the board on the SDGs. So looking to step up very much stakeholder engagement in the roadmap, looking to make it systematic, and looking to institutionalize that engagement. And all of that is good and well, but we need to be able to measure. Measuring and evaluating engagement and its benefits can help improve, ultimately, the quality of engagement. Again, one example of the work that we've undertaken on your behalf is in collaboration with the International Association for Public Participation that I mentioned, and we've developed a framework of indicators of quality engagement for the 2030 agenda. Again, this is another tool that governments will have at their disposal to facilitate their own stakeholder engagement processes. This very busy slide is a manifestation of the follow-up and review architecture that has now been put into place in Asia and the Pacific, possibly one of the more comprehensive architectures that exists. Because what you can see, hopefully, at the very bottom is at the national level of our follow-up and review architecture. And this is somewhere where most of the countries are highly engaged. The voluntary national reviews that Timor-Leste and other countries are very busy with right now is the centerpiece of the follow-up and review architecture at the national level. And we're working hard to support countries to make their VNRs robust, to make them data-rich, and of course to make them inclusive. And in this regard, the Secretariat has played an important role in building capacity for national follow-up. One example, of course, is the technical assistance to all of the VNR countries that we have been trying to provide over the course of the past couple of years, and especially this year. And this year is especially important because we have 16 countries from our region reporting on their VNRs at the high-level political forum, the highest number we've had to date. So there is a national layer. There is an important sub-regional layer as well of engagement, of follow-up and review, because all of this has to plug into existing mechanisms, existing processes, whether they be in the Pacific, whether they be in ASEAN. And so that remains. But the sub-regional level is interesting because there's also, to some degree, support going down. So it's not just agenda setting, but work in support of the priority agendas that are being identified. At the regional level, this forum in which you sit, the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, now in its 6th year, has become the most comprehensive and inclusive platform for follow-up and review. Countries have made the APFSD really an integral part of the conference structure of ESCAP. So the APFSD provides the ideal setting, including for the VNR countries, to test out their reviews, to learn more from each other, to share experiences. It is, of course, also the venue to take stock of progress of the roadmap, the regional roadmap for implementation of the 2030 Agenda, as we are doing in this session. And the outcomes of all of these, from the national to the sub-regional to the regional level, flow into the global level, the high-level political forum, which is the global mechanism, the prime instrument for follow-up and review. The July 2019 HLPF will be the last one before the review of the 2030 Agenda at the SDG Summit, which takes place at the upcoming 74th session of the General Assembly. So since the new organizational aspects of the HLPF will be defined based on outcomes of the ongoing review at the General Assembly resolution, all of your countries' political support will contribute to ensuring that the role of the HLPF and the regional forums in the follow-up and review process. All of that is a very convoluted way of saying the whole mechanism, especially at the global level, is up for, no, I wouldn't say rediscussion. The SDGs are set, all of that is set, but is there any tweaking to the way the high-level political forum is positioned and how we as a region are inputting into it? And that conversation is happening right now in New York, and we hope to gather your thoughts from here as well on it. We have, you'll see somewhere here on the slide, the knowledge products, the data, the in-depth analysis, all of this supports implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the regional roadmap. And one such example, of course, is the SDG Partnership Report that ESCAP, ADB, and UNDP issued last night. So that, Excellencies, dear Chair, ladies and gentlemen, is really a whirlwind tour of the regional roadmap, where it came from, and where it sits in all of the regional and global architecture for following up, for reviewing, for just seeing how we're doing on SDG implementation. And I leave you with guiding questions, but I think, dear Chair, this is the opportunity for me to hand back to you, because the guiding questions are one that will guide the conversation as we go through the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Executive Secretary, for a comprehensive presentation, for your presentation. And now, given the focus of this session on the regional roadmap and follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda, I would like to invite the initial remarks from sub-regional cooperation bodies present. And I would therefore invite from Mr. Semi Korela-Vesau, Minister of Fisheries of Fiji, to open the discussion with remarks on how sub-regional priorities expressed in the Pacific roadmap complement regional action on the SDGs and avenues for strengthening regional follow-up and review through closer links with sub-regional process. Please, Your Excellency.
Excellencies and distinguished delegates, follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda at the regional and sub-regional level continues to play an important role in supporting member states in monitoring of the SDGs, capacity development and their voluntary national reviews, among others. The regional and sub-regional dimensions must be fully recognized and engaged to support the ultimate goal of leaving no one behind. Recognizing this, and in line with the Asia-Pacific mechanism of APFSD and the regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia-Pacific, we in the Pacific have put in place our own Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development. Endorsed by the Pacific Islands Forum in 2017, the Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development integrates the framework for Pacific regionalism and the Samoa pathway. It includes a SDGs accountability framework with 132 indicators of success for the Pacific. The Pacific Roadmap appreciates the uniqueness of the Pacific and, importantly, the applicability of the global goals and their indicators in the Pacific context. In saying this, there is no doubt that the alignment of global, regional, sub-regional, and national processes are so crucial in ensuring effective and meaningful cooperations and partnership at all levels, including through sharing of experience and peer learning. For Pacific small island developing states, it would also assist in our efforts to reduce the monitoring and reporting burden that is required of us. The Pacific Roadmap seeks to tackle the key regional transboundary issue of climate change and disaster, risk reduction, and ocean management. Furthermore, it addresses the important issues of empowerment, inclusivity, and equality as espoused in the 2012 Pacific Leaders Gender Equality Declaration and the Pacific Framework for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It also aims to tackle the unfinished business of MDGs for poverty reduction, quality education, and means of implementations. In line with these commitments, I am happy to share with you the following achievements. Firstly, in September 2018, the Pacific Islands Forum leaders had endorsed the first quadrennial Pacific Sustainable Development Report. This report addresses issues that are to be considered in the UN SDG Summit and the Samoa Pathway High-Level Meeting, which are to be held at the UN General Assembly this year. We are very pleased to also note the executive summary of the first quadrennial Pacific Sustainable Development Report that has been included as an official document of this forum. Secondly, I am happy to say that the regional and UN agencies are jointly supporting Pacific countries as they produce their voluntary national reports. We encourage the use of VNRs to enhance national accountability processes, especially to the Samoa Pathway. Support for Kiribati's VNR in 2018 and recently Nauru and Tonga are good examples of regional and UN agencies' collaborations of VNRs. We are also grateful to the UN for convening a VNR capacity training in Fiji in September last year as part of our preparations to this session of the APFSD. These are significant steps in the right directions. It is important to note that the Pacific Sustainable Development Report has highlighted increasing vulnerabilities and deepening inequalities in the Pacific and recommends building capacities, systems and resources in areas such as social safety network and broader social protection. There are areas that we are committed to address, and we know that we need to collaborate better with our partners to achieve them. As we look to the future, therefore, the following suggestions are made to further improve collaborations. Firstly, we encourage the UN system to continue to advance our collective efforts to improve the coherence of the global, regional, sub-regional, and national accountability processes for the Samoa Pathways and the SDGs. Secondly, we seek a more systematic approach to collaboration between the Pacific regional organizations and the UN organizations. Thirdly, we seek to leverage the Asian expertise and resources to make better use of science and technology to realize the potential of the private sector, especially in the area of small and medium enterprises, fisheries, ecotourism, culture, and labor mobility. Fourthly, we need to create more opportunities for exchanges of best practices, lessons learned and experienced by countries through the SDGs implementation and VNR processes so that we can all improve as a region consistent with our vision to leave no one behind. Lastly, there needs to be further engagement in the development of the finalization of the regional, sub-regional reports on SDGs to ensure meaningful inputs from all the member states and key stakeholders. In conclusion, I wish to say that the Pacific Sustainable Development Roadmap and the Steering Committee for Sustainable Development are the regional coordination platforms to guide collective actions on sustainable development in the Pacific. We appreciate the support of the UN system has provided at the regional and national levels in developing and supporting these specific mechanisms. And we look forward to more opportunities for collaboration and partnerships in the future. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Corella Vesau, for opening the discussion. I now invite our second speaker, His Excellency Kun Phuoc, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, to share how implementation, follow-up, on review mechanisms of the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 complement our regional action on the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Excellencies. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, and delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. It is my pleasure to attend the 6th session of the Asia-Pacific Forums on Sustainable Development. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to ESCAP for inviting me and for the excellent arrangement for this meeting. The ASEAN region has made tremendous economic and social advances in development outcomes for its people over the past 50 years. Regional cooperation has enabled the region to benefit from continued peace, stability, and security. This has in turn translated into development progress, which has significantly improved the quality of life of our people in ASEAN. ASEAN Community Vision 2025, adopted in November 2015, the same year as the adoption of the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development, sets out measures that need to be undertaken to achieve a peaceful, stable, and resilient ASEAN community by 2025. A major area of focus has been improving access to education. There has been a steady increase in net enrollment rates at the primary, secondary, and tertiary education level over the past 10 years. Challenges for children and youth in ASEAN to access and remain in education are being addressed from a multi-pronged approach, such as gender, education, social norms, and financial inclusion, among others. In this regard, the ASEAN Senior Official Meetings on Education is working to strengthen education services for 3.6 million children who remain out of school in ASEAN. Undeniably, factors such as child early or forced marriages, which impede access to education of young girls in the region and also boys, are being addressed by the ASEAN Commission on Women and Children in partnership with UN agencies such as UNICEF, UN Women, and UNEPA. Aside from access to education, it is imperative that quality of education is being addressed in the ASEAN region. It is important that education and ensuing skills remain updated and relevant to the needs of the 21st century and ever-changing employment and labor structure. Young people need to be equipped with life skills such as critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity, innovation, and flexibility. This has been acknowledged by the Education Minister of ASEAN during the 10 ASEAN Education Minister meetings held last year in Myanmar, where the commitment to remain visionary and consider new and innovative ways by which to provide education was affirmed. In fact, Thailand 2019 Chairmanship of ASEAN also highlights the importance of lifelong education as well as promoting people-to-people connectivity and partnership. Being mindful of the expected challenges from Industry 4.0, ASEAN strengthening its TVET programs and higher education cooperation, youth employability is being enhanced through skill training and lifelong learning. ASEAN is also working on increasing its understanding on the impact information and communication technology we have on employment relationship. Certainly, in addition to access to education, to employment and employability, the promotion of decent work remains at the core of ASEAN commitment, especially the ASEAN Social-Cultural Community Pillars Agenda. The ASEAN Minister Work Programs is addressing matters relating to the safe and decent work and productive employment. Focus is placed on safe migration, addressing discriminatory practices in the workplace toward women and people with disability and those living with HIV/AIDS. Last but not least, ASEAN recognized the necessity to address the voices and the needs of vulnerable groups in our society, particularly women, children, older person, and persons with disabilities through empowerment approach, with the aim of turning them from vulnerable to valuable groups, whose contribution is essential to the region development. As such, continuing efforts have been made to address the issue concerning vulnerable groups, such as the elimination of violence against women and children, empowerment of older persons through economic empowerment, and strengthening of long-term care system through the work of our sectoral body, namely the ASEAN Committee on Women, ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, and the Senior Official Meetings on Social Welfare and Development, as well as through strategic policy direction stipulated through Regional Plan of Action and related instrument adopted by ASEAN leaders. As for international collaboration and partnership, ASEAN has collaborated with the UN in promoting the Complementarity Initiative. Together, we have undertaken joint report, research symposium, such as the joint report between ASEAN, Thailand, and the ESCAP on complementarity between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. A framework for action, I'm pleased to note that one of the recommendations of the report, the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development and Development Study and Dialogue, will be launched in 2019. ASEAN has also collaborated with the UNDP and China in conducting a series of Leave No One Behind ASEAN-China UNDP Symposium and research with the UN Office for South-South Cooperation and producing a publication of Mapping South-South Cooperation in ASEAN. There are also many other activities that the ASEAN Secretariat will be undertaking to support sustainable development in ASEAN, such as through midterm evaluation of the ASCC blueprint, the conduct of the forthcoming Leave No One Behind ASEAN-China UNDP Symposium and research with a theme on inclusive innovation on 18-19 September 2019 in Vietnam, and strengthening the monitoring and analytical capacity of the ASEAN Secretariat. All these activities bridge existing platform and create synergy between the two important agendas. Ladies and gentlemen, strong political commitment at the highest level in ASEAN enables an environment where the ASEAN Vision 2025 and SDG emphasize and improve each other's quality, with the similar aim of improving the lives and well-being of our people of ASEAN. The success of regional grouping in unlocking and exploiting the synergy between the regional work programs with UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is no doubt the success of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development itself. With that note, let us work together to enable an environment that barriers for development are removed, innovative policies and approaches formulated and applied, and complementarity between regional work programs and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development are leveraged on. Let us work together closely or further unlock the potential of regional grouping to achieving the UN 2030 for Sustainable Development and for the SDG to contribute back to regional integration and development. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Kruonfuak. And we now turn to South Asia, and I invite Ms. Varuni Muthukumarana, Director of Education, Security and Culture, Secretariat of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. You may have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. South Asia is home to 1/5 of the world's population, containing some of the most densely populated regions of the world. Despite substantial progress in recent times, major challenges remain in areas such as universalization of primary education, gender disparities in enrollment and completion rates, and illiteracy among youth and adults. South Asia is also facing a youth bulge in demographic terms, which presents also a window of opportunity for a better future for the region if we could provide equitable quality education, skills development, and harnessing of information and communication technologies. I would like to give a brief overview of developments regarding the SAARC Framework for Action for Education 2030, which provides an overall strategy for educational development in the region and seeks to promote specific commitments of South Asian governments in achieving SDG 4 targets. The Framework for Action originated at the last SAARC Ministerial Meeting on Education held in New Delhi in 2014, where the ministers recognized the educational challenges facing the region and agreed to expand cooperation to pursue identified priority action. The New Delhi Declaration, which was the culmination of this ministerial meeting, agreed to formulate the SAARC Framework for Action for post-2015 educational agenda. And following the New Delhi Declaration, the SAARC Secretariat has worked closely with UNESCO New Delhi and UNICEF ROSA to facilitate the process of promoting regional cooperation in education to support SAARC countries achieve SDG 4 targets. The framework for action has been adopted by the technical meeting of senior officials of SAARC countries held in 2016. However, it is pending adoption by the next ministerial level meeting, which we hope will be held in the near future. The technical senior officials meeting held in 2016 also agreed on an action plan on the implementation of the New Delhi Declaration on Education. SAARC countries have identified 13 areas for regional cooperation, which are indicated in the action plan. Some of the key areas of cooperation include technical cooperation and exchange of expertise, generating knowledge base required for supporting policy formulation, policy dialogue, advocacy and program support communication, and monitoring of programs of SDG, etc. Each country is assigned a particular theme and is expected to lead the assigned theme, with the role being to coordinate the activities that benefit all countries. Regional monitoring of SDG 4 progress is one of the core activities agreed by all SAARC countries. A regional monitoring framework is being developed, including indicators. The framework of action has been shared at several regional and international meetings. Pending the next SAARC ministerial meeting on education, the SAARC Secretariat, in collaboration with UNICEF, ROSA, and UNESCO, has organized a technical meeting of senior officials of education, which was held last year, where member states agreed to nominate focal points for SDG 4, especially regarding the framework of action. During the last 6 months, the member states have nominated the focal points, which have been disseminated by the Secretariat along with their terms of reference. As for the next steps, it has been proposed to hold a statistical capacity development workshop for developing the SDG 4 monitoring framework and for preparing for the 5th APMED meeting. This would be very important, as it would help SAARC countries generate data which are in line with SDG 4 monitoring. That is the development in the South Asia region as of now. We hope that with the pending ministerial meeting and with the statistical development capacity building meeting which is scheduled, we will generate more positive developments within this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the insights, Ms. Mutukumarana. We'll now hear from a development partner who is active across the region. I invite Mr. Jin Ho Song, Vice President of the Korea International Cooperation Agency, to share how KOICA works to support regional priorities and to enhance regional cooperation around the SDGs.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that all of us, ASEAN, Korean, and the international community uphold the people-oriented and inclusive values of a global pledge that leaves no one behind as a pillar of our development strategy. ASEAN has proposed a people-oriented and people-centered concept as the Asian Community Vision 2025, emphasizing the importance of people in development. This corresponds to the Korean government ASEAN-Korea Future-Oriented Community Initiative that aims to create a people-centered community of co-prosperity. The 3P core values of the Korean government initiative strive for achieving a people-centered people community, a peace-oriented peace community, and a community of prosperity, community of co-prosperity, common prosperity that allows people to live well together through economic cooperation. They are also closely linked with the 5P values of the SDGs on which the international community has reached its consensus. As the Korean government leading international development and cooperation agency, KOICA is incorporating SDG 5P principles and Korean government 3P strategy into our development project with a primary focus on addressing the gap in development and enhancing the connectivity within the region in order to create a people-oriented and people-centered ASEAN community as pursued by ASEAN countries. Let me firstly say about the people. COICA will extend our support for higher education to promote the empowerment of youth who will become a driving force for ASEAN development. As you may well know, Korea is the country that achieved the rapid economic growth and democratization through human resource development. For a country with no resource, with no capital and no experience, human development through education was the only way to boost a rapid socio-economic development. I believe that Korea's valuable experience in development based on human resources could be an exemplary case for ASEAN countries to stimulate socio-economic development. Number two, peace. COICA is pursuing not negative peace which simply maintains no conflict status, but positive peace that is politically, economically, and socially sustainable as our ultimate goal. To fulfill such goal, COICA will enhance transparency and effectiveness of governance in the Asian countries by supporting e-government services built upon Korea's IT technology and ensure that low-income and vulnerable families equally enjoy public services. Also, we will establish an integrated water resource management system which builds a database of precipitation and the chance of flooding in order to reduce damage from frequently heavy rainfall in ASEAN countries, especially in Mekong region. Based on such data, COICA's assistance for drainage management and flood warning system will be provided. The third, prosperity. Urbanization and the connectivity of transportation are the major drivers of the ASEAN economic development, and thus they are important parts of the COICA's plan for creating ASEAN community of co-prosperity. The issue of urbanization of ASEAN arising from a rapid economic growth will become a significant factor for future economic development. At the moment, the average rate of the urbanization of ASEAN countries is about 40%. To tackle potential issues in this early stage of urbanization, such as inequalities in hierarchy and space, COICA will develop an urbanization program that embraces sustainability of urban development and inclusiveness of the vulnerable based on Korea's experience in creating outstanding smart cities. By sharing Korea's knowledge and experience in operation and construction of the inclusive digital partnerships and public transportation and highways with ASEAN countries, COICA will support the integration and the successful urbanization within the region to achieve sustainable development and strengthen connectivity between ASEAN countries. I am very much looking forward to hearing valuable opinions during this session, and based on what we discussed today, I will make a full commitment to the advancement and successful implementation of COICA's ASEAN partnership and cooperation strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Song. We will now hear from two representatives of major groups and other stakeholders. First, Mr. Akash Bafsar, Managing Director of SkyQuest Technology Group and the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. I would start by quoting Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, who I quote, "I am counting on the private sector to drive success. Now is the time to mobilize the global business community as never before. The case is clear. Realizing the Sustainable Development Goals will improve the environment for doing business and building markets. Trillions of dollars in public and private funds are to be redirected towards the SDGs, creating huge opportunities for responsible companies to deliver solutions." Of course, I unquote. So businesses, as we look back, coming from the private sector, traditionally in Asia Pacific and in the traditional business culture, the center for production was also the center for consumption. There was extremely localized businesses, so the effect of the solution or the product was felt naturally by the society around. And so it was visible. Those were the days when, in the Chinese culture, we call it taipan, basically, or the people who take care of the community and the local business leaders. But as the globalization came along and the centers of production and the centers of consumption grew apart and the decentralization became the theme, where the effect of the activities of businesses were not as readily visible till the results became, in some cases, catastrophic or alarming, where the global voice actually started leading back to the consciousness and the rise in consciousness, which today we see as the wonderful SDGs being framed. So the role of business, as we see, is not just about creating jobs. And in developing countries, as there are several reports which states that 9 out of 10 jobs are created in the private sector. So it is now, when we look at the role and the specific aspects of what private sector can do, and of course it is an extremely important part of the whole piece of the puzzle which will help us solve and achieve SDGs, is that how do we look at, rethink in the business with respect to prioritize and understand better what is the impact of the activities in the business, also align core business strategies with the SDGs, and work towards more accountability and transparency, also aspects of financing financing towards achieving this transition within the businesses, and working on the relationship with governments, multilaterals, and the business sector at large. So the companies, I would say, coming from the private sector, and one of my personally favorite companies, Google, which began with "Do no evil" was their motto. So as you would see, there is no offset for harm, right? Any businesses which would, or any activity which cause harm, you can do carbon offset, but no harm offset. So it's very important that the internal alignment within the companies is that there is, that activities must ensure that they do no harm. Now, again, going further, how do we assess and how do we ensure? So if I submit, let's say a business case approach to SDGs, where they are, from a business sector point of view, creating $1 trillion opportunity for any good solutions out there. So the businesses today have to think that, are they willing to pay the extra wage which is needed across the supply chain to improve the equality, or are we willing to pay extra taxes which are needed in order to kind of finance certain goals? I would make a case in point. I come from India, and in 2016, a massive exercise was launched by the government, which was called a Clean India Mission, or the Swachh Bharat Mission, which basically was attacking the SDG 6, where the aim was that the 550 million open defecation to be reduced to 220 million, within a 3 to 4 year time zone. And close to $20 billion of expenditure has been kind of envisaged, and that is being funded through a levy of what is called a Clean India cess, or a Swachh Bharat cess, which is an additional marginal tax, which has been levied. And I would like to bring to the attention of the august audience that by 2021, this is expected to create a $62 billion opportunity for the business sector, entrepreneurs and all. So the point I'm trying to make here is that, with the right alignment with the policies which are coherent and with the right mindset, I think businesses can create and derive value from the SDGs. And I would quickly, as ESBN, we, as the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, basically the aim is to mainstream from Asia Pacific good business practices which are happening across different sectors, and which is happening through, by formation of 6 different task forces. One is in banking and finance, which is extremely critical. Then we have the digital economy task force, the disaster and climate risk reduction, green business, innovation and competitiveness, youth and women entrepreneurship. Through this, more than 200 businesses and more are reached, and they are cataloged for good practices, which which are helping achieve or move closer towards the SDGs, and try to give them a platform so that these best practices can be implemented across different parts of Asia Pacific. So with that, I would like to close my statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bafsar. With this, I am now pleased to invite our final speaker in this round of initial remarks, Ms. Ranja Sengupta of the Third World Network, who will share how regional follow-up and review may be strengthened through the roadmap, particularly through contributions from non-government actors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also the NGO focal point and co-chair of the Asia-Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, and I would like to share some thoughts here based on our discussion and common positions in the just concluded Asia-Pacific People's Forum, and also from other regional CSO processes. For the past 3 years, we have watched the Regional Roadmap Initiative, which was launched by ESCAP in 2016 and endorsed by member states in 2017. The roadmap has identified areas of work that could tackle obstacles and create opportunities, and including issues such as aging, migration, disabilities, gender equality, and women's empowerment, and acknowledges that inequalities and social protection should be studied to enable better policy advocacy. The roadmap was designed to foster regional cooperation on 11 priority areas, as was described earlier, including around critical MOI that needs efforts above national levels. This has to be based on a partnership between governments supported by stakeholders that helps poorer countries in the region, which are especially dependent on MOI and regional cooperation, to help implement their SDG commitments. At a regional level, this process has the power to act as a replicable model for other regions for sharing of both learning and resources at a regional level. We as CSOs of the Asia-Pacific region have always strongly supported the regional roadmap process, as we feel it can do more than just provide a discussion forum and can actually deliver much needed regional MOI in a targeted and need-oriented manner that can help support the LDCs, SIDS, countries with special needs, and other developing countries in the region, most of whom still suffer from massive poverty and high inequality and lag behind on most of the SDGs. CSOs have repeatedly affirmed this position in CSO statements during APFSD 2016, 2017, and 2018, and in the Busan and Ulaanbaatar declarations on peaceful, just, and inclusive societies in Asia and beyond, which came early this year. However, and there's a big however, we see very limited effort so far on effective and meaningful development of either process or content of the roadmap. Implementation has been difficult as there are very few clearly identified actions actually to implement. Not only are instruments on important sections missing, the document remains too general and fails to include specific innovative solutions that can meet current and emerging challenges of the region. Further, there are no resources that have been promised to support this process, without which it cannot move. The document is meant to be a living document, but we have not seen any movement in it in the last 2 years. The progress report also shows a clear lack of advancement on many of the identified important areas. So in moving forward, we have the following recommendations that respond also to the guiding questions that you laid out. First, while the mandate is general, the success of this initiative will lie in being able to rise to current challenges and come up with very specific solutions and actions at a regional level, which are very difficult to do at a global level. For example, it should respond to the climate crisis in the region by harnessing climate finance and technologies, plug illicit financial flows and foster tax cooperation, promote aid facilitation and management, ensure fair trade rules that ensure policy space for development, foster capacity building of poorer countries, and technology that are accessible and beneficial to the people at large, and engage on emerging issues, and this one is important, such as digital technology, which, while of great benefit, have major regulatory and privacy issues. In particular, its unfinished work on creating a regional tax forum needs to be finished as it addresses a critical issue in the region. Second, We also feel the regional roadmap should be further shaped to contribute to specific needs of marginalized and grassroots constituencies, and to support their efforts to meet sustainable development objectives and breach economic and social divides. And this is very much in keeping with its mandate. For example, it can work on localization of access to financial resources, aid and technology, foster participation of communities in trade negotiations and policy development, and help garner community data to supplement data gaps about which we heard earlier, and so on. Third, the current mandate itself cannot be cast in stone. It should be open to further discussion and to including issues that are important for the region. We see trade, as for example, is an important missing element given the increasing number of trade and investment agreements and their extensive and intensive coverage. This could perhaps lead up to more specific actions on the trade front. Fourth, process is key. We see absence of a clear process of how these priorities and specific issues and actions will be identified and pursued. This needs to be worked out based on discussion among member states with inputs from key stakeholders, especially civil society. Fifth, we ask for dedicated resources to support this process. If the regional cooperation mechanism has to deliver actual results, it cannot be done without financial and non-financial resources, which the UN and member states, especially the advanced countries, could provide. Sixth, for the regional roadmap process to succeed, there needs to be a robust accountability mechanism to monitor and review its progress. While UN ESCAP is trying to monitor it, we see the report and a genuine attempt to monitor and report on the progress. It needs a clear and more accountable process that will actually help it deliver. Finally, we strongly ask for a dedicated and institutionalized civil society mechanism for the roadmap that will engage, monitor, recommend, and support member states and UN ESCAP's efforts to take it forward. This should be done from an independent perspective based on the principle of leaving no one behind. And this is absolutely critical. As CSOs, we do engage in the APFSD process, but this mechanism needs to be embedded in this specific action-oriented and longer-term process of the regional roadmap in a systematic way. So we call upon all member states to put sincere efforts in this initiative to make it a meaningful and effective one and ensure it reflects and responds to current needs and it does not die an untimely death. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sengupta. Thanks to all for these insightful remarks, which will inform further steps taken for regional cooperation on the SDGs, which have set the tone for statements by countries and stakeholders. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to invite the distinguished delegates to intervene on Agenda Item 3, Session 5, Where are we on the roadmap? I will first open the floor to statements from members and associate members, and then permanent observers. Once all country statements have been made, I will invite statements from intergovernmental bodies, after which I will open the floor to the representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies, and finally to designated representatives of civil society, major groups, and other stakeholders. I kindly remind the delegates to reduce their statement to no longer than 3 minutes length to allow all delegates the opportunity to speak. To begin, I would now like to open the floor for statements and views from governments. I recognize the distinguished delegate from Republic of Korea.
Thank you. Actually, we didn't ask for the floor, but since we are given with this precious opportunity, let me make a very brief statement. The Asia-Pacific is perhaps the most diverse and dynamic region in the world. It is home to the world's largest population. The region accounts for nearly 2/3 of global growth. It is also home to nearly half of global biodiversity hotspots. Ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity is rich in the region. Such diversity generates ample knowledge for the region to share, broadening opportunities for cooperation. However, it also means that the region requires diverse solutions relevant to each different context. It is encouraging to see good practices and lessons for SDG implementation being accumulated in the region. However, it is concerning that data availability is extremely low for assessing the status of the regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda in Asia and the Pacific. I would like to thus urge ESCAP and other relevant partners to consider ways to overcome such limitations in order to properly take stock of the implementation of the regional roadmap. We believe that ESCAP is well positioned to carry out policy analysis and research, identify the region's needs, and facilitate peer learning and multi-stakeholder engagements. Based on such strength, the Republic of Korea expects ESCAP to expand its partnership with other UN agencies and regional development institutions in support of the implementation of the regional roadmap. Korea will remain an important partner in the region in the process of implementing the SDGs. Through its new Southern policy, Korea aims to improve mutual understanding through the exchange of people, seek prosperity, and promote peace in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Korea. Now I invite the distinguished delegates from Samoa.
Thank you, Chair, and we also would like to thank our generous hosts, Thailand, and thank ESCAP for the arrangements. In linking the national, regional, and global dimensions of the 2030 Agenda, and in order to ensure the effective implementation of the Asia-Pacific Roadmap, the most important work and support needs to be at the national level. For Samoa, the exercise of mapping the SDGs to our national strategies allowed us also to uncover capability gaps while also building capacity around data gathering and statistical analysis. We stress that in order to have a realistic chance of success, the goals needed to be contextualized at the local level because the response mechanisms are not always the same. Our main focus has been mainstreaming the SDGs into national development plans, budgets, and monitoring and evaluation frameworks. This also helps institutionalize whole of society and stakeholder participation. We have also ensured there is the linkages made to the international frameworks, such as the Samoa Pathway, the Framework for Pacific Regionalism, Paris Agreement, which are also key documents for our Pacific Regional Roadmap, which the distinguished Minister of Fiji spoke about. Why is making these interlinkages important? We recognize that the interlinkages are important for including these commitments in strengthened national mechanisms and systems. It helps address the issues of reporting burden, data collection gaps, and address the capacity and financial resource constraints with monitoring and implementing the SDGs and all the other regional and international strategies and frameworks, including the Asia-Pacific Regional Framework. Now, at the regional level, implementing the SDGs through our Pacific Sustainable Development Roadmap has highlighted the importance of working collaboratively with peers in the region to share and learn from each other. Peer learning has become a hallmark in the Pacific, so that the first choice for technical assistance is always from the Pacific SIDS. For example, in the preparations of VNRs, Samoan officials supported Kiribati with their preparation as a peer learning exercise. In the last 5 years, we have hosted 40 officials from different Pacific countries to learn about the public finance management reforms of Samoa and to determine whether these can be applied in their country context. New Zealand invited Samoa to do a peer learning exchange on implementation of the SDGs, and this was executed this year in February. The value in tracking at both country level and regional level are that where there are gaps at country level, this can be addressed at the regional level. This also builds solidarity of regional members towards successful implementation. Now, given the burden of reporting on SIDS like Samoa, the regional report, such as the recently issued Pacific SD report, helps maintain momentum and provides highlights on progress made in the Blue Pacific region in achieving the SDGs. It is also an important contribution to the regional roadmap for Asia Pacific. In terms of further linkages to the international obligations, Samoa is looking at linking SDG implementation and monitoring with national processes for monitoring and reporting of human rights conventions and the other MEAs. We aim to do our second voluntary report in 2020. I thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Samoa. Now I invite the distinguished delegate from Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to witness the commitment of all governments and stakeholders throughout the world for the 2030 Agenda in order to create a sustainable future. After presenting the first VNR in 2018, the government of Sri Lanka is now in the process of taking follow-up action on its findings. Sri Lanka has already started mainstreaming SDGs in the national and provincial plans. Legal framework and institutional mechanism have been strengthened to implement the SDG through the formulation of Sustainable Development Act and establishing the Sustainable Development Council. The 12-member council is a high-powered entity appointed by the President and chaired by the Secretary to the President. At present, it is developing a digital platform to monitor the implementation of SDGs and identifying the accelerators for prioritized implementation. Mr. Chair, in this statement, I wish to speak briefly on our status with respect to SDGs that are under in-depth review this year. On education, Sri Lanka has taken several steps for enhancing the quality and equality in education to all, and especially for the low-income and rural students. The introduction of interest-free loan scheme for the students who to pursue studies which they repay only after receiving jobs, introduction of national policy on early childhood care, development of IT infrastructure at schools, improving facilities at vocational training institutes, and orientation of students for vocations through the 13-year compulsory education are some of those. On the economic front, however, Sri Lanka has several challenges ahead. Entrepreneurship is lacking, and significant improvements are needed to compete in the global economy. 75% of all Sri Lankan enterprises are SMEs, and many need upscaling and technological advancement. The government has introduced several low-interest subsidized loan schemes in a program called Enterprise Sri Lanka in order to develop entrepreneurship and promote self-employment to increase exports. It encourages and contributes to increased participation of women entrepreneurs, students, and the differently abled people, and thereby to increase their income. National indices with respect to poverty and per capita income in Sri Lanka are satisfactory, but inequalities exist among different groups and regions. The government is implementing national programs such as Samurdhi, Gampirliya, Gram Shakti to improve the living standards of marginalized groups and develop rural infrastructure. The elderly population is growing, and measures are needed to keep this group active and ensure their welfare. The government is implementing several programs such as countrywide free clinics for elders, upgrading elder care centers, supporting elderly for self-employment with training and funding, counseling programs for retirement, training programs for caregivers, and empowerment of elderly organizations. Mr. Chair, in 2018, Sri Lanka became the second highest climate risk country in the world. Sri Lanka needs external support to implement its climate change adaptation plans. Even though Sri Lanka's contribution to greenhouse gases is marginal, we have committed to reduce our emissions further. Sri Lanka has introduced systems, policies, and mechanisms to fight corruption and financial frauds, and steps have been taken to ensure that Sri Lanka's anti-corruption framework complies with the provisions of UN Convention Against Corruption. Introduction of Right to Information Act, then adoption of National Action Plan for the promotion and protection of human rights are some other significant measures that we have made. On SDG 17, the government is engaging with member countries and UN to facilitate South-South knowledge sharing, networking, capacity building, and best practice sharing. It is in the process of negotiating with bilateral and multilateral agencies for the implementation of development projects and programs. So thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Sri Lanka. Now I invite the distinguished delegate from Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia has achieved progress on several means of implementation indicators. To ensure leaving no one left behind, Indonesia has allocated domestic resource for poverty eradication program, increasing coverage of health workers, improving quality of teachers at all levels, upgrading facilities for school, and providing access of technology in effort to enhance ease of business. Indonesia realized that domestic resources from the national budget cannot solely cover the financial needs to achieve the SDG targets, such as we have explored utilizing public-private partnership and optimizing religious donation. For example, Indonesia is among the first Muslim countries to implement the fikih zakat on SDGs. Indonesia is also developing a dedicated SDGs financing hub, which will serve to synergize financing resources, bring together both supply and demand side, coordinate various forms of financing, and align such funding with the National Development Priority Agenda. To accelerate the mobilization of resources for the SDGs, Indonesia will participate 2019 SDGs Investment Fair in the auspices of the 2019 Financing for Development Forum. On disaster risk reduction and resilience, Indonesia is continuing to strengthen this policy. For example, with clear roles and responsibilities between government and non-state actors. We also continue to align urban management with the new urban agenda. On climate change, our NDC aims to reduce greenhouse gas emission up to 29% at the end of 2030. At the subnational level, the strategic document for disaster risk reduction has been developed. In natural resource management, Indonesia is accelerating effort to mitigate deforestation and forest fires. In recognition of our archipelagic profile, Indonesia has prioritized connectivity to ensure no one is left behind by developing fiber optic, national satellites, improving quality of fixed broadband, and increasing the mobile broadband coverage. On data and statistics, Indonesia has coped with challenges to provide disaggregated data by improving skill and statistical staff at the government institution as data producers, as well as improving the national statistical system. Chair, to obtain effective implementation and strengthen the follow-up and review process of the regional roadmap, we propose the following, such as: first, identify and map the area of cooperation based on country-led approach. Second, our region needs to better leverage the achievement to each country and the available data of the means of implementation indicators at the country level to measure target at the regional level. Third, we need to clearly define the methodology for data collection as part of the regional stocktake. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Indonesia. Now I invite the distinguished delegates from Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The SDGs monitoring and measuring progress require enhanced statistical capacity in each country. National Statistical Institute needs to acquire new knowledge and skills to analyze new data sources and to achieve the modernization of its work, in addition to providing and strengthening existing public statistical data on an ongoing basis. Statistical Institute of Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP, a statutory body of ESCAP, located in Chiba, Japan, provides to government statistical officers from developing countries with training courses and support necessary to cope with those emerging needs and challenges in each country. Support by ESCAP is highly valued by countries in the region and beyond. Mr. Chair, the government of Japan, as host country of the ESCAP, will continue to support and collaborate with ESCAP with a view to contributing to achieving SDGs in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Japan. Now I invite the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me floor. Bangladesh is one of the important countries who work in the preparatory process of the regional roadmap for implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia Pacific. Bangladesh is giving importance and priority in regional cooperation and partnership for implementation of regional roadmap for implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and in the regional roadmap and global agenda. Domestically, Bangladesh has showing the highest political will to implement the SDGs under the dynamic leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Bangladesh has incorporated all goals and targets of SDGs in its 7th five-year plan, which has started in 2016. All development plans and action are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. For successful implementation of development goals, Bangladesh thinks the regional cooperation is a critical issue. Bangladesh always raises its voice in different forums to increase the regional cooperation, regional and sub-regional cooperation and partnership for full implementation of SDGs. We know Asia Pacific is the region where most of the poor people are living, so we need comprehensive and combined approach to fight against poverty and to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Chair, financing is one of the critical issues to implement the SDGs. Country like Bangladesh, this has not the sufficient resources, is one of the issues which is the most important barrier to implement SDGs. We are trying to increase our domestic resources, but that's not enough. So we are getting the support from our, we are expecting the support from our parents and development partners. For financing, trade is one of the important engine which can help the member state to increase their financing capacity. If we can increase the regional trade among the countries to avoid the existing tariff and non-tariff barrier. Mr. Chair, technology is another important priority area where we need more cooperation. We should share and cooperate with each other to develop our technology and expansion, which will help of this region to lift up their lifestyle and development. By regional cooperation and partnership, the region can develop its technological knowledge and can earn by increasing export. Mr. Chair, the region has an opportunity to share among the member states to develop capacity building through the skill and trained manpower, women empowerment, developed ICT and transport network. Bangladesh feels by full implementation of Asian Highway Network, Trans-Asian Railway and a dedicated ICT network for the region like the Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway could help the region to increase the regional cooperation and partnership, which can give leverage to implement the SDGs. Mr. Chair, giving the importance of sharing of best practices, Bangladesh has given its all support to share its best practices with other member states for increasing regional cooperation and partnership. Under the South-South Cooperation umbrella, we are already doing this work. So we can share our successes in girls' education, women empowerment, and success in ICT sector. We are also seeking support from our member state for their successful practices from our parents. Mr. Chair, Bangladesh is fully supporting the ESCAP initiative as a regional commission. We are feeling by strengthening the ESCAP, we can use the full potential of ESCAP, and we shall get better output in the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. Are there any other governments who wish to speak before I open the floor to intergovernmental bodies? I see no one. So I will now open the floor to intergovernmental bodies, other UN agencies, major groups, and other stakeholders. I would like to invite representative of IUCN.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, IUCN last year marked its 70th anniversary as a unique network of governments, NGOs, and recently indigenous peoples' organizations as member organizations with 7 decades of experience in nature conservation. As you are aware, recognized by the Paris Climate Agreement, ecosystems play a critical role in regulating the world's climate through their function as natural carbon sinks. Healthy ecosystems also help vulnerable communities adapt to the adverse effects of climate change and offer protection against climate-related disasters. IUCN assesses the risks that species and ecosystems face from climate change and develops conservation responses to these. IUCN also advances practical nature-based solutions to tackling climate change based on the effective conservation, management, and restoration of the world's ecosystems. IUCN's work in this area aims to benefit humans and ecosystems alike, taking into account the needs of the most vulnerable, including women and indigenous peoples. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, IUCN implements and supports projects including global initiatives such as the Bond Challenge to conserve, restore, and sustainably manage natural ecosystems as a way to effectively mitigate and adapt to climate change while providing a range of other co-benefits. The Bond Challenge aims to bring 150 million hectares of degraded and deforested land into restoration by 2020 and 350 million hectares by 2030, harnesses the power of forest landscape restoration, offering an excellent opportunity for fully unlocking the mitigation potential of forests and making more ambitious NDCs feasible while enhancing the resilience of ecosystems and societies. In Asia and the Pacific, a total of 24 million hectares has been pledged to the Bond Challenge from 5 countries that are present here: Bangladesh, India, Mongolia, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. When contrasting NDCs with the Bond Challenge, the significant role that this global initiative can play in leveraging the mitigation and resilience potential of nature-based solutions such as forest landscape restoration is evident. FLR activities such as planted forests and woodlots, silviculture, and agroforestry are the most prominent nature-based mitigation actions expressed by countries. Yet only about 1/3 of those commitments are expressed in some form of quantifiable targets, and none mention whether those are aligned with other international commitments like the achievement of Aichi targets, land degradation neutrality, or the Bond Challenge, among others. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in most cases, countries often seem to express lower NDC commitments than those made under the Bond Challenge. When considering NDC targets expressed in hectares, 21 NDCs across the world refer to a potential for restoring around 56.7 million hectares. compared to the 168 million hectares of bond challenge. For Asia, only 6 countries refer to restoration of 4.1 million hectares compared to 24 million hectares already pledged. This highlights the opportunities for effectively and coherently aligning international commitments and national landscape policies through the FLR approaches, and moreover, underline the relevance of global initiatives such as Bond Challenge to promote policy integration and mobilize international technical and financial support to leverage more ambitious climate action under the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, representative of IUCN. I now invite the representative from Center for Women's Research, Sri Lanka.
Your Excellency, honorable delegates, fellow activists, my name is Kala Piris and I'm from Center for Women's Research, Sri Lanka. I'm speaking on behalf of the thematic working group on gender, sexuality, SRHR and ASEM. We wish to underscore the importance of regional roadmap and its potential as a tool for achieving transformative sustainable development in our region of Asia and the Pacific. The roadmap emphasizes placing gender equality and women's empowerment as a central issue of the regional policy agenda. As it is a living document, we urge for greater policy coherence with the other regional processes, in particular those of the social pillar, to assure progress. The policy coherence is critical to reducing inequalities, to ensuring inclusion and empowerment, and to facilitating leadership and engagement of women and other marginalized groups such as young people, people living and affected by HIV and LGBTIQ, amongst others. Realizing human rights and gender justice requires purposeful dismantling of structural barriers and deepening entrenched systems of oppression. Strong guidance for member states to achieve this is contained in the outcomes from the regional level Asia-Pacific processes of ICPD and Beijing, amongst others. They call for removing, replacing discriminatory laws, policies and norms as a top priority for achieving a gender equality and fulfillment of sexual and reproductive health and rights to achieving sustainable development goals. These priority actions and their implementation, monitoring and review have already been agreed and committed to by the governments of Asia and the Pacific. Chair, we wish to call attention to the accelerating progress and empowerment inclusive Equal Asia and the Pacific report launched last night, which notes a negative trend of a disenabling environment and limited ability of civil society to engage in Agenda 2030 spaces, compounding the experience of already excluded and marginalized groups. Support for civil society and especially women's rights activists is critical to counteracting shrinking spaces. We urge for greater support and institutionalization of the ASEM to ensure that the voices and concerns of communities are being addressed. For without people, we are nothing. Finally, we call for member states to implement, monitor and review the regional roadmap and develop an engagement mechanism for regional and local civil society in the Asia-Pacific in order to truly realize gender equality and human rights, including sexual and reproductive rights for all. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Center for Women's Research. Now I would like to invite the representative of LGBTIQ constituency and youth constituency.
Thank you, respected Chair. We, the LGBTIQ and youth constituency of the APRCM, collectively issues the following statement. We believe the leave no one behind principle is especially relevant for LGBTIQ and youth because we have been repeatedly left behind by the development agenda. Injustice from the current model of global development, lack of agencies and bodily autonomy, discriminatory laws, traditional and cultural practices, negative social attitudes, and rising fundamentalism at the intersection of patriarchy continue to disempower the LGBTIQ, their families and youth. We are criminalized, threatened, and killed for our sexual orientations and gender identity. We are excluded from social and economic structures, suffer from poor physical and mental health, disparities in access to equal education and job opportunities, among other issues. LGBTIQ and youth who are marginalized further because of other social dimensions face double burden of disadvantages and inequalities. We therefore present our vision for the regional roadmap implementation and urge you, respected Chair, we demand reform of laws, regulations, policies that criminalize, stigmatize, discriminate against LGBTIQ people and LGBTQI families at all levels and ensure social inclusion, representation, and body autonomy. Second, we demand transgender persons' right to self-identification without any administrative and medical classifications. Third, ensure universal social protection, including education, health work, pension, and other social securities, and ensure corporations are taxed progressively so these taxes can be used by the government toward public service accessed by the LGBTIQ people and other marginalized communities. 4. Ensure accessible, comprehensive, and quality education that respects, promotes, and protects LGBTIQ youth and children of LGBTIQ families and other young people uses as human right-based framework. Further, age-relevant and scientifically accurate comprehensive sexuality education must be made mandatory at all levels. Fifth, reform legal policies and programmatic frameworks that prohibits SOGI's discrimination in public and private sector workplaces. Sixth, ensure economic empowerment through access to decent work and living wage at workplaces where LGBTIQ and young people, especially young women, don't face stigma, discrimination, physical, sexual, mental harassment, and violence. Sixth, ensure economic empowerment through access to decent work and living wages. Seventh, ensure that policies, programs, and budgets are gender responsive, feminist, human rights-based, and participatory, and all decision-making process around their views, implementation, and monitoring includes young people and LGBTIQ persons. Invest in data collection and action to understand the nature and extent of discriminations faced by the LGBTIQ peoples and young people in order to inform policies and programs to effectively address our life realities. Ensure youth and LGBTIQ people are included in policies and programs on climate change, disaster risk reduction, and fulfill our demand for feminist, fossil fuel-free future. Respected Chair, we demand development justice and address the systematic barriers. Truly effective, inclusive, and meaningful, sustainable development cannot be achieved until these structural inequalities are acknowledged and addressed directly. Thank you.
I would like to thank all delegates for their insights. I now invite Mr. Kaveh Sahedi to provide a response.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't be able to provide a response, but allow me just to maybe jointly reflect with you on some of the elements that we'll be able to take away from this session and in fact take into the next session as we begin to formulate the main messages of this APFSD, the messages that countries and stakeholders wish to take away from here and project into the global process. The first comment, and it really relates to almost all of the interventions, is that we're not just behind with the implementation of the regional roadmap. We're behind on the implementation of the SDGs. It's not a problem of the roadmap per se. The issue is that we're not on track for the SDGs. So no matter how you reformulate the roadmap, that won't change. What we need to do is refocus efforts and accelerate implementation of the SDGs themselves. That is really the core need, as it were. The roadmap is just one vehicle that we have to focus our minds, to focus our efforts. But if the underlying efforts of implementation of SDGs are falling behind, that will of course be reflected in the roadmap's progress as well. Having said that, it was very clear that there is, in a way, a need for greater clarity on targets, clarity on actions of the roadmap, right? Bring a little bit more specificity. And this is something that, of course, we need to think about and see how this process can now be can now evolve. As our colleague said, it was from the very beginning meant to be a living document, and well, we have to make sure that we live up to that. Having said that, what we don't need to do is to renegotiate a mini version of the SDGs. The SDGs are there, the goals are there, the targets are there, the indicators are there, right? But we just have to refocus the way we deal with them, the way we implement them, and how we pull them in. The third comment, Chair, is that I think there is a call for greater alignment. Alignment of the roadmap with the SDGs and their targets, alignment of the roadmap with the sub-regional frameworks that we have, alignment of the national with the sub-regional, with the regional, with the global processes. I think that's something that we need to see how, as we evolve the roadmap, we can also use it as the vehicle to bring about the alignment that many are calling for. And bringing about that alignment, of course, would also help with the more systematic follow-up and review that is needed. Finally, Chair, if I could refer to the issue of the means of implementation. Again, means of implementation are a very important part of the roadmap, but they are also a very important part of the SDGs. And when colleagues note that financing is key and we're behind on financing, if you look at the SDG Gateway and the analysis we've done of the region, it also shows that that is one of the areas where we're in the red, where it said that we're going to increase financing. We haven't financing for the SDGs. And what you see in the roadmap is a microcosm of it, financing within the ambit of the roadmap, of course. Now, whether the answer is to find a pot of money for the separate implementation of the roadmap, or whether to actually address the fundamental issue of lack of finance for the SDGs is an open question. Do we need to resource the roadmap, or do we need to resource more the actions that countries are taking, the actions that stakeholders are taking to deliver on those targets in the SDGs, which are also embedded in the roadmap? I think that's a conversation that is likely to spill over, and it's of course not limited to one means of implementation. Finance, it applies to technology, it applies to partnerships, and above all, it applies to data. And this is my last point. Clearly, there are big data gaps. But I hope what you've seen and the attempt that we've made here is to demonstrate that we needn't be paralyzed by lack of data. Yes, we have to identify where the data is lacking. Yes, we need to help fill those data gaps by working with national statistics offices, by ensuring that some of those gaps can be filled in innovative ways with big data, with community-generated data, and other ways that we have to do it. Yes, we have to get more disaggregated data. Otherwise, we don't know who is being left behind. National level, regional level will mask some incredibly important elements of where we need to pay attention, including what we heard from the last intervention. So data and closing those gaps is going to be fundamental, and that's one of the areas where we're going to put as a secretariat a lot of our efforts. But again, it should not paralyze us, because when you look at the progress, whether it's the progress on the roadmap or the progress on the SDGs that you can find on the SDG Gateway, you will see that even with what we have, the trajectories are clear. We know where we're moving in the right direction. We know where we're too slow in our moving in the right direction. We know where we're moving in the wrong direction, at a regional level, at the ASEAN level, in the SIDS, in the Pacific context, Northeast Asia, all the various different contexts that you wish, in the LDC context, etc. And I think that helps us with our prioritization of the actions, the collective actions, of the investments, and we hope that that's one of the areas, of course, that also helps us with the alignment, aligning what we're doing with how we can support countries and VNRs. So, Mr. Chair, I think that's just some of the points that really resonated as colleagues and countries and stakeholders spoke to us on this agenda item on progress on the regional roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sahedi. I thank you all for your statements. And this concludes session 5. We will now proceed to session 6. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, now I would like to invite the distinguished rapporteurs of the parallel SDG roundtables to join me at the rostrum. Reporters of SDG 4, SDG 8, SDG 10, and SDG 13. We will now continue with session 6 under agenda item 3, linking national, regional and global dimensions of the 2030 agenda, which will focus on what issues and recommendations on follow-up and review we need to bring to the attention of the 2019 High-Level Political Forum, both under the auspices of ECOSOC in July, as well as the SDG Summit under the General Assembly. Yesterday, we were informed about where our region stands in terms of empowering people and ensuring inclusiveness and equality, and learned about progress on SDG 17. Earlier today, we were also informed about the experiences of countries in our region with the voluntary national reviews and the progress made for the implementation of the regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia and the Pacific. Now we will hear a reflection on main messages and policy recommendations from 5 roundtables that discuss the cluster of SDG under 2019 review Sustainable Development Goals 4, 8, 10, 13, and 16. These reflections will be provided by the rapporteurs of the roundtables. Let me now start with SDG 4 roundtable and invite my distinguished colleagues, His Excellency Mr. Ariel, Secretary of Ministry of Education, Science and Technology of Nepal, to take the floor. Mr. Ariel, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 4 on Quality Education was organized by UNESCO and UNICEF with inputs from the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, ESCAP, and from a multi-stakeholder reference group under the overall coordination of ESCAP. The Roundtable made the following policy recommendations to further advance progress on SDG 4 in Asia and the Pacific. The policy first recommendation is accelerate efforts to remove systematic and non-systematic barriers that hinder equity, inclusion, and quality at all levels of education through ensuring participation of diverse stakeholders. And policy 2 is diversify learning pathways, including both formal and non-formal education, to eradicate illiteracy. Policy 3, increase and ensure the supply of motivated, qualified, adequately resourced, and empowered teachers supported by the enabling environment. Policy 4, increase investment by reaffirming the global commitment to allocate at least 4 to 6% of gross domestic product and or at least 15 to 20% of total public expenditure to education, and ensure an efficient, transparent, and equitable resource allocation and accountability in expenditures. Policy 5, strengthen monitoring of inclusion, equity, and quality by ensuring that adequate resources, mechanisms, and capacity are available. And policy 6, promote greater engagement of diverse stakeholders, including but not limited to young people, civil society, academia, media, private sector in the achievement of SDG 4 and maximize synergies among SDGs. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you for your punctuality, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Subandi Sarjoko, Deputy Minister for Human and Community Development, Ministry of Development Planning, Indonesia, Rapporteur of the SDG 8 Roundtable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth, was organized by the ILO with input from UN ESCAP, UN Environment, UNDP, and the Institute for Global Environment Strategies under the overall coordination of UN ESCAP. The Roundtable made the following 6 policy recommendations to further advance progress SDGs 8 in Asia and the Pacific. Policy Recommendation 1. Be inclusive in setting and strengthening the institutional mechanism for decent work-led, sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. Given its breadth, making progress on SDGs 8 necessitates the integrated planning of a broad array of actors, including Ministry of Economy, Environment and Local and Labor, local government, trade union, employers organization, the private sectors, international organization, non-governmental organization, and civil society. A particular emphasis should be made to ensure that also the voices of marginalized groups are included in the decision-making process. Policy Recommendation 2. Strengthen labor market institutions for effective and inclusive labor market governance. Key labor market institutions include legislation and regulation on employment and social protection, anti-discrimination, occupational safety and health, unacceptable form of work, minimum wages, and freedom of association and collective bargaining. These LMIs, when properly enforced, are critical to the achievement of SDGs 8 as well as for the other interlinked goal concerning the eradication of poverty SDGs 1, achieving gender equality SDGs 5, reducing inequality SDGs 10, and promoting just institutions SDGs 16. Special consideration is needed to extend the reach of labor rights and promote safe and secure working environment for vulnerable groups, including home-based and migrant workers. Also related to strengthening institutional is the call to increase the capacity of National Statistics Office to ensure regular collection of labor force surveys or other household surveys needed to monitor decent work and inclusive growth. Policy Recommendation 3. Develop and enforce national policies and programs to combat child labor and for better prevention and assistance to victims of forced labor. There are a variety of strategies and measures available with the aim to strengthen legislation and policy framework for action against child labor discussed in the recent ILO report released in 2017, Ending Child Labor by 2025, a review of policies and programs. To facilitate more effective policymaking and monitor impact, it is of critical importance to increase investment in data collection. Policy Recommendation 4. Step up investment in human capital to provide all people the opportunities to realize their full potential throughout the life cycle. While education for all, lifelong learning, and building technical and core skills are themes featured under SDGs 4, they also serve as key input to human development as well as the decent work and economic growth outcome of a country. For this reason, and in the context of rapid technological advance, progress in SDGs 8 will necessitate increasing investment in people capabilities. This may include a universal entitlement to lifelong learning that enables people to acquire skill and to reskill and upskill, while also increasing investment in the institution, policies and strategies that will support people to navigate the increasing number of labor market transition over the course of their lives. Policy Recommendation 5. Progressive policy reform are required to promote a just transition toward environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. With economic prosperity and social progress in the region threatened by environment degradation and climate change, there is an urgency to act on climate change. The transition to a low greenhouse gas economy is expected to lead to a next creation of jobs, including green jobs. However, the challenge remains to ensure that greening of economies does not threaten the livelihood or marginalized groups. As more countries are encouraged to adopt broad and comprehensive policy framework on the green economy, attention will need to focus on implementation, especially in view of ensuring that no one is left behind in the transition process. Policy Recommendation 6. Design coherent and integrated strategies to ensure the dignity of work for all, including for informal workers and those in precarious employment. Certain countries in the region have initiated strategies to formalize the informal economy in line with the ILO transition from the informal to the formal economy recommendation 2015 number 204, adopted by International Labour Conference in 2015. The guideline of RR number 204 highlight the formulation of appropriate macroeconomic and skill policies, simplified registration procedures, extended scope of and compliance with labor laws, improve access to credit and offering incentives such as tax incentive, and extending social protection coverage to all categories of workers, including migrant workers. Technological advance demand the further extension of social protection and regulation of new forms of work that have the potential to erode the quality of job for an increasing number of workers. I thank you.
I really appreciate your clear message from the Roundtable. It is now the turn of Her Excellency Ms. Bulgantuya Kurelbatar, Vice Minister of Finance, Mongolia, Rapporteur of SDG 10 Roundtable. Your Excellency, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 10 on Reduced Inequalities was organized by the Social Division of UN ESCAP with inputs from UNESCO, ILO, IOM, and UNDP under the overall coordination of UN ESCAP. The Roundtable made the following 6 policy recommendations to further advance progress SDG 10 in Asia and the Pacific. Number 1, reap maximum benefits by focusing on social protection investments. All countries need to step up investments in universal, accessible, and gender-sensitive social protection in accordance with the social protection floor. Social protection is a transformative investment in people if well designed and implemented. It boosts economic growth, dampens inequality, and protects against environmental and disaster risks. Number 2, promote decent job creation and equal pay. Policies should be developed along the 4 pillars of decent work, including principles and rights at work, job creation, social protection, and social dialogue. Adequate minimum wage setting and affirmative action are some tools for supporting the incomes of those in the lower part of the income distribution. Achieving equal pay for work of equal value requires policies aimed at combating discriminatory practices and gender-based stereotypes, including about the value of women's work. It also requires effective policies on maternity, paternity, and parental leave, as well as advocacy for better sharing of family responsibilities. Number 3, increase the effectiveness of fiscal policies. An effective tax system enhances public revenues and facilitates increasing investment in essential services such as healthcare, education, and social protection. To this end, a regional fiscal tax reform could ensure effective reform strategies for progressive taxation, curbing tax evasive corridors, combating illicit financial flows, and corruption. More effective programming and gender-responsive budgeting are needed. A regional cooperation mechanism could be enacted to support a comprehensive review of tax policies, trade and investment agreements, and private sector accountability. Number 4, protect the poor and disadvantaged from disproportionate impact of environmental hazards. It is essential to address the disempowerment of marginalized communities and their lack of voice and visibility as a root cause of vulnerability to the impacts of climate change and environmental hazards. Disaster risk reduction mechanisms need to be inclusive, taking into account the vulnerabilities of all groups, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status, and build on traditional knowledge systems and practices. Furthermore, strengthen regional cooperation for monitoring of emerging transboundary disaster hotspot is needed, including disaggregated data highlighting the groups most at risk. Number 5, address the digital divide and potential risks of the fourth industrial revolution. For the most marginalized to benefit from new technologies, government regulations should ensure that they are accessible and affordable for all. The impact of new technologies and fourth industrial revolution on human rights should be reviewed by intragovernmental bodies from a pro-people and pro-planet perspective. Number 6, address inequality as a driver of migration and reduce inequalities faced by migrants. The scale and complexity of internal and international migration and its impacts on society mean that efforts to achieve equality must include migrants. Addressing inequality as an adverse driver of migration and reducing the inequalities faced by migrants, especially vulnerable groups of migrants. Migration should be choice, take place in safe, orderly, and regular fashion, respecting the rights of migrants and their families, and mechanisms should be developed to produce and share accurate, disaggregated data that are used to guide policy. The global impact for safe, orderly, and regular migration provides guidance on steps countries can take to achieve this goal. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Madam Vice Minister. Now, Her Excellency Ms. Nino Tandilashvili, Deputy Minister of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, will now present the report of SDG 13 Roundtable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action was organized by UNISDR, UNFCCC, and UN Environment with input from UN ESCAP, IGES, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and UNESCO under the overall coordination of UN ESCAP. Before going to the policy recommendations, I would like to thank all those who have been participating in this roundtable discussion, because it was very interesting to hear all of you, and it was a very lively discussion, which actually gave the quite interesting policy recommendations. The policy recommendation 1 is to integrate climate change and disaster risk reduction into the entire project cycle from policy planning to implementation. Integrate climate action and disaster risk reduction into the project management cycle across all sectors. Urgent action is needed to understand risk, prevent new risks, reduce existing risk, and adapt to a changing climate by strengthening coherent climate and disaster risk governance systems, and develop evidence-based and inclusive policies that are linked to financial resources. This includes developing coherent disaster risk reduction and climate change strategies at all levels, including all relevant stakeholders, that create multiple benefits focusing on national priority sectors, such as scaling up sustainable food and energy consumption and production, investing in resilient and sustainable infrastructure, and applying ecosystem-based approaches that increase resilience and carbon storage. To implement the ecosystem this recommendation, the Roundtable recommended to develop sector-specific knowledge products, such as policy briefs based on the experiences of the countries in the region that can be used by DIF stakeholders in advocating for coherent climate and disaster risk policy planning and implementation by the next APFSD 2020. Policy recommendation 2. Leverage climate action with co-benefits. leverage climate action from mitigation, adaptation, and resilience-focused efforts in line with the Paris Agreement with co-benefits for realization of multiple SDGs across all levels, local, subnational, national, sub-regional, regional, over the short, medium, and long terms. Climate actions can leverage co-benefits in areas of inter alia air pollution, including transport, energy, SDG 7, SDG 13, human settlements and infrastructure, sustainable smart cities, SDG 9, SDG 11, ecosystem restoration, sustainable land management and biodiversity, SDG 14, SDG 15, inclusiveness and gender equality, SDG 5, SDG 10, public health, SDG 3, water scarcity and quality, SDG 6, as well as education and vocational training. Policy recommendation 3 is about to strengthen the monitoring system and data collection, investment in climate and disaster risk assessment and disaster loss accounting systems with emphasis on vulnerability analysis and disaggregated data collection will enable implementation and monitoring of adaptation and disaster risk management policies and inform public investment frameworks. National environmental and disaster statistics and disaster forensic capabilities need to be improved to identify socio-economic impacts of past extensive and intensive disasters, assess costs and benefits of disaster risk reduction investments, and improve accuracy of future disaster risk modeling. Emphasize the importance of data for national planning and localizing the SDGs. Ministries responsible for managing monitoring systems and data collection should leverage existing platforms and mechanisms to strengthen coordination and data sharing across sectors, civil society, and other stakeholders. Policy recommendation 4. Strengthen regional cooperation on mobilizing financing for anticipatory disaster risk reduction and adaptation strategies. Regional cooperation encompassing countries, civil society, and other stakeholders should strengthen the focus on mobilizing and financing ex-ante measures to prevent hazards from becoming disasters. Such collaboration could focus on enhancing capacities of countries to improve the quality of disaster risk assessment, to inform public expenditure and institutional reviews, conducting technical reviews to better understand the financial arrangements which are suitable to the risk profiles and capacities of countries, scaling up of innovative anticipatory financial mechanisms, and regional and global networking of civil society organizations. Access of civil society organizations to financial mechanisms should be enhanced to enable them to contribute to addressing the vulnerabilities of local communities to disasters. Policy recommendation 5 is to develop innovative and blended climate finance tools, complement conventional and international climate finance with blended approaches to climate action and disaster risk reduction by mobilizing private sector financing and shifting national budgets. While examples of blended financial tools exist in the region, the conceptual understanding and implementation knowledge is limited, especially among SIDs, DS, and LDCs, who need readiness support to develop such tools and access relevant funding mechanisms. Innovative schemes can include launching carbon pricing instruments such as emissions trading system or a carbon tax to incentivize industries to reduce emissions. Tools such as green and catastrophic bonds and integration of climate change and disaster risk reduction into business operations should be promoted. While doing so, screening markers and safeguards should be developed to ensure the returns to investment are not limited to economic, but also cover social and environmental returns, which also enhances accountability. Necessary incentives should be provided to enhance the development and application of such tools. And finally, financing tools should ensure that investments in adaptation are increased. And policy recommendation 6, improve access to and flow of climate finance. The institutional capacity of governments, civil society, public and private stakeholders needs to be strengthened to develop bankable proposals that allow investors to make climate-related investments. For instance, through creating climate finance training in universities. Developing countries, especially small islands, developing states, least developed countries, and climate vulnerable areas will require readiness support to accredit direct access entities and help them develop successful GCF proposals. Finance reporting needs to be improved and climate finance flows need to become more transparent to address the gap between pledged and received resources. This can be achieved by engaging civil society in the review of proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam, for your concise report and messages. Before moving on to SDG 16, with your kind permission, I would like to ask His Excellency Mr. Ariel to redeliver SDG 4 due to a technical problem with the recording, but only SDG 4. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 4 on Quality Education was organized by UNESCO and UNICEF, and with inputs from the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, ESCAP, and from a multi-stakeholder reference group under the overall coordination of ESCAP. The Roundtable made the following policy recommendations to further advance progress on SDG 4 in Asia and the Pacific. Policy recommendation first, accelerate efforts to remove systematic and non-systematic barriers that hinder equity, inclusion, and quality at all levels of education through ensuring participation of diverse stakeholders. Concrete and effective policy interventions to remove any forms of barrier, direct or indirect, to education and to significantly increase equitable access to quality learning opportunities during early years and pre-primary level are vital. Policy recommendation 2, diversify learning pathways including both formal and non-formal education to eradicate illiteracy. Implementation of effective literacy programs, formal or non-formal, that are of high quality and tailored to learners' need and linked to skill development for decent work and livelihood are crucial. Flexible school education programs that allow students to continue to formal education should also be provided as a viable option. Policy recommendation 3, increase and ensure the supply of motivated, qualified, adequately resourced and empowered teachers supported by an enabling environment. Teachers as well as caregivers and facilitators for early learning, ECD, must be accorded either support and resources for their continuous professional development, decent working conditions, and career pathways. Policy recommendation 4, increase investment by reaffirming the global commitment to allocate at least 4 to 6% of gross domestic product and or at least 15 to 20% of total public expenditure to education and ensure an efficient, transparent, and equitable resource allocation and accountability in expenditures. Full realization of SDG 4 and reversing the stagnation of funding to the education sector require an increased, sustained, innovative, and well-targeted financing. Governments have the primary obligation to ensure the right to education and a central role to ensure effective accountability systems are in place for effective allocation and use of resources. Policy recommendation 5, strengthen monitoring of inclusion, equity, and quality by ensuring that adequate resources, mechanisms, and capacity are available. To comprehensively and systematically track progress and address inequalities, a high quality and more disaggregated data based on gender, sex, ethnicity, language, income, disability status, and geographical location must be available to planners, decision makers, and stakeholders. Greater investment is needed in national statistical systems that are struggling and demand for more and better data for the global goals and targets. Policy recommendation 6, promote greater engagement of diverse stakeholders, including but not limited to young people, civil society, academia, media, private sector, in the achievement of SDG 4 and maximize synergies among SDGs. The achievement of SDG 4 requires the involvement of other sectors and collective efforts, participatory mechanisms with all stakeholders to help set priorities and implement strategies to accelerate the achievement of SDG 4. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ariel. Now we will move to SDG 16. I will now take off my hat as chair of APFSD and report back from SDG 16 Roundtable deliberations. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 16 on peace and justice was organized by UNDP with input from UNICEF, Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNODC, and UN ESCAP under the overall coordination of UN ESCAP. The Roundtable made the following policy recommendations to further advance progress of SDG 16 in Asia and the Pacific. Overall policy recommendation: ensure Sustainable Development Goal 16 is reported every year in a similar way to Sustainable Development Goal 17. Policy recommendation 1, to localize Sustainable Development Goals, institutionalize Sustainable Development Goal 16 in local planning, budgeting, monitoring, and reporting systems. Policy recommendation 2, to strengthen access to information and civic engagement, decriminalize dissent. Policy recommendation 3, data and reporting for Sustainable Development Goal 16. Strengthen the capacity of national statistical systems to elaborate with diverse stakeholders on disaggregated data collection with specific focus on vulnerable groups, including persons with disabilities and indigenous groups. Policy recommendation 4, improving public sector financing, increase public sector financing for the Sustainable Development Goals through progressive taxation, institutional capacity development, and meaningful civic participation. Policy recommendation 5, multi-stakeholder engagement, institutionalize inclusive multi-stakeholder platforms and mechanisms to ensure accountability, accessibility, and transparency through information sharing, data gathering, bottom-up progress reporting, as well as the review of funding allocation and spending based on international standards. Policy recommendation 6, oversight and accountability, strengthen the role of oversight institutions and involve non-state actors in Sustainable Development Goal planning, implementation, performance reviews, and reporting to all levels of government. I thank you for your attention. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to thank you all for your brief and concise reports and for conveying those important messages from the SDG roundtables. Now I am retaking my other hat. Now I would like to invite Ms. Laila Laura Santos, Minister and Second Committee Expert at the Philippines Mission to the UN Headquarters, who will share some important views on the linkage between the national, regional, and global follow-up and review process on behalf of Ms. Azucena, Vice President of ECOSOC. Madam, you have 5 minutes for your intervention.
Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the floor to give some brief remarks on behalf of Ambassador Kira Azucena, the Vice President of ECOSOC. Over the past 2 days, we have heard and shared with each other the regional perspectives on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have had in-depth reviews of SDGs and gained a stronger appreciation of the linkage in national, regional, and global dimensions of the agenda. We have also heard important updates on the Pacific Roadmap from ASEAN, from SARC, and perspectives from donors, the private sectors, and the NGOs. In this background, some of our takeaways from this forum are the following. Political will to implement SDGs is key. SDGs are to be aligned with the national development plans and national priorities. Links between policy planning and budget appropriation should be strengthened. The importance and availability of quality, reliable, and disaggregated data cannot be overstated. Indeed, if you are not counted, you do not count. Data collection, evidence gathering based on data, and information and analysis support from UN is crucial. Developing statistical capacity building is necessary. Multi-stakeholder consultations are indispensable and should be institutionalized. It gives us a whole picture and is in line with the whole of country and whole of society approach. It ensures ownership in SDG implementation, both as a process and as a product. In addition to local communities, marginalized groups, private sector, and other stakeholders, it is important to engage media in our work. The role of media in advancing our work has not been exhausted. We need to clearly convey beyond the walls of the UN and to the people on the street what we are doing, why we are doing what we are doing, and what is the benefit of our work to the people. We should have a communication plan which raises awareness and educates on the 2030 agenda. SDGs need to be localized, voluntary local reviews encouraged. We need to be cognizant and address pressing challenges such as climate change, technological disruption, migration, and trade, among others. And the reforms of the UN development system should substantially increase the efficiency of the UN system with the reinvigorated RC system in supporting member states in their efforts to implement the 2030 agenda. Your Excellencies, we need to fulfill the commitments of the agenda. This agenda, with its 17 goals, 169 targets, and 230 indicators, is the most ambitious and universal agenda ever adopted by the United Nations. We thank ESCAP for the conduct of the 6th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development. This forum is crucial as it allows Asia-Pacific countries the necessary space to inform and share and learn from each other's experiences on implementing the SDGs. The APFSD captures important discussions and developments in our region, which should then feed into the high-level political forum discussions to be held in New York in July and September this year. As we all know, we do not have the same amount of space in the noise that is New York, but we should nevertheless ensure the impactful engagement of our region. Specific to the July HLPF, it is important to note that 16 of the 50 countries to present their voluntary national reviews are from this Asia-Pacific region. The VNRs are encouraged to showcase not only successes in SDG implementation, but also in identifying challenges and obstacles. As the ECOSOC Vice President representing the Asia-Pacific Group, this representation will help ensure that the discussions and outcome of this forum feed into discussions in New York, and that in planning for the program of HLPF in July, VNR presentations are conducted in the most interactive manner, facilitating peer learning and cooperative endeavors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam, for sharing the views of the Vice Chair of ECOSOC, and we take her advice seriously on how to bring forward the issues and recommendations from the Asia-Pacific region to the global arena. Now let me invite Ms. Asa Hayden to make a statement on behalf of Ambassador Olof Skog, who is one of the co-facilitators of the political declaration for 2019 HLPF Summit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you and ESCAP for a well-organized APFSD. I'm honored to convey the following remarks on behalf of Sweden's ambassador to UN, Olof Skog, one of the co-facilitators of the political declaration for the HLPF Summit 2019. The 2030 Agenda is a roadmap to a better world. Let us follow its path. A sustainable development means making life better without harming future generations and without wasting resources. This could only be achieved if we all work together with a holistic approach that benefits people, planet, and prosperity. We must work together to tackle our common challenges in an international environment where multilateralism is strengthened, not weakened. The President of the General Assembly has appointed Sweden and Bahamas to conduct consultations on the political declaration of the high-level political forum on sustainable development under the auspices of the General Assembly in September this year. Sweden is enthusiastic about the task ahead and humble that we were asked to conduct the consultations to prepare the declaration to be adopted at the SDG summit. We see the summit as a critical opportunity to accelerate progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and identify courses of action that can allow us to achieve the world envisioned in the 2030 Agenda. This should be reflected in the declaration that must give a sense of how far we have come in the implementation of the agenda and inspire accelerated actions. We stress the universality and indivisibility of the 2030 Agenda. The political declaration needs to have a focused political message that is understandable and that inspires action from all stakeholders. It should be a document that speaks to people, but at the same time is phrased at a high level without too much detail, appropriate for the heads of states and governments who adopt it. We aim for consensus. The mandates for our work are clear. The 2030 Agenda asks the HLPF, under the auspice of the General Assembly, to provide high-level political guidance on the agenda and its implementation, identifying progress and emerging challenges, and mobilize further actions to accelerate implementation. The General Assembly Resolution 67/290 stipulates that the outcome of the September HLPF should be a concise, negotiated political declaration to be submitted for the consideration of the Assembly. After the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, the General Assembly Resolution 70/299 decided that the Forum should have only one negotiated political declaration, covering the different and complementary functions of both sessions of the Forum when the Forum is convened twice in the same year. Since the July HLPF will not have a negotiated outcome document, the President of ECOSOC has initiated that she will produce a robust and detailed President's summary. At this stage, consultations are being conducted with all the regional groups of the United Nations. Consultations with stakeholders are also planned, and we will keep informal consultations open to major groups and other stakeholders in line with the practice of previous years' HLPF negotiations. We plan to have our first informal consultation in New York in May, and it is our intention to finalize the declaration in June, well ahead of HLPF in July. I call to all member states in the Asia-Pacific region to contribute to the process to ensure that the political declaration inspires to accelerate actions in achieving the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insightful statement, which calls on all of us to contribute to the process and help to ensure that the political declaration inspires to accelerate actions in achieving the SDGs. Dear distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, with your permission now, I would like to share with you, and in my capacity as the chair of the 6th APFSD, my take from the deliberations so far and highlight some important issues for our region to take forward. On the main theme, the Forum recognized progress in areas of poverty reduction, education and health. However, highlighted that rising inequalities in the region threaten to leave people behind. The Forum noted widening income and wealth gaps, unequal access to resources, education, employment opportunities, technologies, and social protections, and the impacts on vulnerable and marginalized populations as key challenges to achieving the 2030 Agenda. The Forum emphasized the importance of empowerment and inclusive growth to address inequalities spanning social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development, and highlighted especially the need to create opportunities for women and youth. On the roundtables, the reports from the roundtables further enforce these findings. Tying up with this year's theme of empowering people and ensuring inclusiveness and equality, it is clear that a whole of society approach is required for the delivery of the SDGs, and that partnerships and participation are going to be key success factors. We need to accelerate our efforts and adopt coherent and integrated policies that look at the interlinkages between the SDGs to make progress. Good governance as well as appropriate and effective investment are vital for the development and implementation of policies leading our countries towards a truly sustainable future. On the regional roadmap, why are those aspects so important? While reviewing the implementation of the regional roadmap, we were reminded that the quality of governance and the effectiveness of public institutions are crucial for the successful implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Effective governance is linked to participation of people in decision-making. Though member states have recognized the link between public participation, effective governance, and social accountability, governments still face substantial challenges. On regional follow-up and review architecture, in my view, the deliberations over the past days have underlined why a regional platform such as the APFSD is so important. You had very stimulating exchanges this morning during the session on the VNRs, underlining why APFSD is an invaluable platform for peer learning and sharing. Today, this morning, in my capacity as chair, I also spoke with representatives of civil society and I was pleased to learn how over years the forum has grown significantly in terms of engagement with non-governmental sector, creating an invaluable space for all stakeholders to share their views and influence decision-making. We need to safeguard this platform for dialogue and build it stronger, as it brings important contribution to the global debates through the high-level political forum. While the new organizational aspects of the HLPF are being formulated through our country's political support, we can build a momentum to ensure a strong role both for the HLPF and the APFSD in the follow-up and review processes. And now we will move to country and stakeholder statements under agenda item 3. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, country representatives, major groups and other stakeholders and representatives of the international community are now invited to make short statements on agenda item 3, linking national, regional and global dimensions of the 2030 Agenda. Member States are invited within 3 minutes to provide feedback on key elements of review processes and may want to address the relationship between the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development and the high-level political forum, including on how to strengthen regional contributions to the latter. Given that in 2019 the HLPF will be held both under the auspices of ECOSOC and the General Assembly, at summit level, Member States may wish to provide guidance on the way forward to accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. I will first open the floor to statements from members, associate members, and then permanent observers. Once all country statements have been made, I will invite statements from intergovernmental bodies, after which I will open the floor to the representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies, and finally, to designated representatives of civil society, major groups and other stakeholders. To begin, I would now like to open the floor for statements and views from governments. I recognize the distinguished delegate from Australia.
Thank you. Excellencies, Ministers, distinguished guests and fellow supporters of the 2030 Agenda. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver this short statement. Australia supports the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development as the mechanism for follow-up and review of the SDGs. We support country-level VNRs. We support the production of the annual SDG Progress Report produced by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, which produces a useful snapshot of global progress across the SDGs over the previous year. We look forward to the presentation of the first quadrennial Global Sustainable Development Report, currently being prepared by the 15-member expert panel. It is important that there is a mechanism for having our regions, and particularly the Pacific's, concerns discussed at the global level. The 2030 Agenda is a global framework, and it is important that member states outside of our region have an opportunity to understand issues such as Pacific Island countries' sensitivity to external economic shocks, such as global commodity price fluctuations, disruptions in the global supply chain, and financial stress. Also, the impact of catastrophic events such as cyclones, floods, and droughts, and the impacts of and costs of adaptation to climate change, including rising sea levels, saltwater intrusion of freshwater supplies, and ocean acidification, which all impact humans, water, and food security, livelihoods, and the rich Pacific biodiversity and culture. Thank you.
Thank you, the distinguished delegate from Australia. Are there any other governments who wish to speak before I open the floor to intergovernmental bodies? I recognize the distinguished delegate from Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask a procedural question, just to understand the way forward before the conclusion of the APFSD tomorrow. I understand that the several policy recommendations are mentioned by the coordinator or rapporteur of the subgroups, and Mr. Chair, Your Excellency made a good summary of the way forward. I believe that such recommendations and statements are reflected in the chair's summary of the to be reviewed by all participants tomorrow afternoon. Am I correct? I just want to seek a clarity on that. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate. That will be included in the chair's summary. Thank you. Are there any other governments who wish to speak before I open the floor to intergovernmental bodies? I see none. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, I will now open the floor to intergovernmental bodies, UN agencies, major groups, and other stakeholders. I recognize the representative from UN Habitat.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, thank you for the opportunity to offer this intervention on behalf of the UN Human Settlements Program. Please allow us to offer our congratulations to ESCAP for your coordination of the 6th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development. We hold dearly to the principles of SDG Target 10.2 to empower and promote social, economic, and political inclusion for all. In this regard, we hold the New Urban Agenda with a shared vision of right to the city, fostering prosperity and quality of life for all, as critically important to accelerating the implementation of all international development frameworks, which are inclusive of everyone and towards the overall achievement of the SDGs. Supporting the institutionalization of the people's process, placing people's needs and their rights at the heart of urban development, our work in the Asia-Pacific has helped to improve community ownership and engagement by participatory decision-making in alignment of SDG Target 16.7. For over 35 years, this people's process has also served to enhance accountability and transparency between communities and authorities, contributing to the empowerment of communities and sustainability of projects in the long run. Advocating for robust and comprehensive national adaptation plans, UN Habitat produced supplementary guidelines titled Addressing Urban and Human Settlements Issues in National Adaptation Plans launched at COP24 to support member states, national and city level planners, experts and decision makers addressing SDG Target 13.2 integrating climate change measures and international policies, strategies, and planning. Our work in regularizing informal settlements and participatory slum upgrading, such as in Afghanistan, Philippines, and among Pacific countries, has not only served to increase tenure security and access to adequate housing, but also allowed the municipalities to raise property-related taxes in direct alignment with SDG Target 17.1 in strengthening domestic resource mobilization. This upcoming 27th to the 31st of May 2019, we warmly welcome member states, local governments, partners, and other stakeholders from Asia and the Pacific region to the first session of the UN Habitat Assembly in Nairobi, Kenya, with a special theme of innovation for better quality of life in cities and communities. In such a context, a UN Habitat Strategic Plan 2020-2025 will be adopted at the first session of the UN Habitat Assembly, which recognizes reduced spatial inequality and poverty in communities across the urban-rural continuum among its foundational domains of change. Appreciating that 65% of the SDGs may not be fully achieved without the involvement of urban and local actors, especially local governments, highlighting their critical role as partners, we attended in support of the ASEAN Mayors Forum stakeholder consultation and preparatory meeting organized by the United Cities and local governments early this week in this UN building. Finally, we would like to express our gratitude to the Government of Malaysia and Penang Island City Council for hosting the upcoming 7th Asia-Pacific Urban Forum from the 15th to 17th of October 2019, co-organized by ESCAP, UN Habitat, Urbanized Malaysia, and the Government of Malaysia, as well as extending our appreciation to the Government of Fiji, along with Nadi Town Council, in hosting the 5th Pacific Urban Forum from the 2nd to the 7th of July 2019 in the lead-up to APFSD 7. We also wholeheartedly welcome everyone next year to the 10th session of the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, from the 8th to 13th of February 2020. Thank you.
Thank you very much, representative of UN Habitat. Now I would like to invite representative of SAARC Secretariat. I would like to invite the representative of SACOECON.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies and colleagues, I am Ajay Kumar Jha from Sikorigon, India, representing Farmers Constituency of the APRSM. The Asia-Pacific region, despite its fastest economic growth, is home to the poorest and most marginalized peoples. There is a widening inequality between the rich and the poor, worsening poverty exacerbated by regressive trade regimes, tax systems, illicit financial flows, growing financial secrecy, increasing human rights violations, persecution of environmental defenders and whistleblowers, further degradation of environment, worsening condition of farmers and women farmers, deprivation of people's access to resources and services, and worsening impacts of climate change and shrinking democratic space. As seen in the recent ESCAP progress report on the SDGs, more than 2/3 of the SDGs targets are off track and not likely to be met in this region. While there is recognition from governments in Asia Pacific on the importance of the SDGs, there continues to be lack of political will and different priorities at the local level. There are huge gaps in localization, implementation, monitoring, accountability, and policy coherence. Also, we are yet to see the centrality of ecological priorities in the development paradigm and CSO's meaningful participation in the Agenda 2030. We are concerned about lack of coherence and synergy in actions at national, sub-regional, regional, and global level. While sub-regional level actions need more synergy among various dimensions of the agenda and inclusiveness, the regional priorities underpinning the process is wanting. We are also concerned about the regional priorities getting falling off the table in the global discussions. Agenda 2030 cannot be achieved without having focus on rights and participation of communities, including all marginalized populations, landless farmers, peasants, impoverished communities, and communities who largely depend on natural resources for their survival. Similarly, emphasis on poverty and inequality, proactive measures on climate action, enhanced disaster risk reduction, reduction in wasteful energy consumption, and reduced resource consumption in industrialized countries within the region also need more attention. We also need to emphasize trade-related and net energy consumption rather than territorial consumptions, which is discussed predominantly in the climate climate action, as the majority of the countries are net exporter of emissions for goods and services consumed by the developing countries. The corporate capture industrial models of production and consumptive lifestyles also need to be reversed in the industrial countries and developing countries, and communities need to be given a choice in charting their development pathways in the manner that suits their resources and necessities. The rise of authoritarian and patriarchal regimes in the region, rising militarism, anti-people policies continue to facilitate mega free trade agreements, abusive tax practices by businesses and the rich, large-scale land acquisitions and commercialization of natural resources. Most importantly, seas, water, and land have greatly impacted people's right to life and livelihoods and are exacerbating poverty and inequality among all, including between men and women. While we welcome the language on human rights-based approach focused on peace, justice, and rule of law and inclusion in the region, we are also witnessing a worrying trend within this ESCAP that central principles like global cooperation, polluter pays principle, intergenerational equity and ecological integrity, climate and disaster-induced displacement, means of finance, and various modes to achieve it in coherence with the common but differentiated responsibility, etc., are being undermined. We want to remind all of you that sustainability in the world cannot be ensured unless these principles are adhered to in the letter and the spirit, and ESCAP has a responsibility to reiterate these in the global negotiations and regional priorities. I thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite the representative of Indigenous People Major Group.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group. The Indigenous Peoples Major Group welcomes the Regional Roadmap Report on the SDGs. Under the theme of leaving no one behind, the report states, despite high and enduring economic growth and significant progress in terms of poverty eradication, inequality persists in the Asia-Pacific region and in some instances has intensified. Growing disparities in income and wealth, as well as inequality of opportunity, disproportionately affect women and vulnerable groups. At the same time, the report also refers to encouraging progress in terms of implementing 36 global means of implementation targets in the Leaving No One Behind priority area of cooperation. What we believe as areas for improvement in the report is also to provide the underlying factors on the growing disparities in income, wealth, and inequality of opportunities, among others. Addressing the underlying factors and barriers should be included as recommendations in advancing the SDGs and not limited to accelerating implementation of the other targets. We also wish to draw attention to the continuing general reference to vulnerable groups as those left behind. Unless we clearly identify these groups and ensure the protection of their rights, as well as their meaningful participation in designing specific measures and programs to address their specific conditions, needs, and priorities, we will not be able to achieve the overarching goal of leaving no one behind. Participatory monitoring and reporting with data disaggregation by sex, age, ethnicity, and abilities is needed to measure gaps and progress on their inclusion. For Indigenous peoples across the region, we insist that we need to be identified as Indigenous peoples and not just part of the vulnerable group. 2/3 of the world's Indigenous peoples of more than 400 million are in Asia. Majority remains poor, and our rights are systematically violated, particularly our rights to our lands and resources, which are targeted for economic growth and development. We are even criminalized when we defend our rights, and we have no access to justice. These are the underlying factors of why we are not just left behind, but we are being pushed behind further. At the same time, our contributions to sustainable development through conservation and sustainable resource management, among others, are not acknowledged and are even undermined. We thereby urgently request a regional mechanism to identify those left behind and to address their specific concerns and inclusion in the SDGs through the regional roadmap process. In particular, this regional mechanism should provide avenues for those left behind to present their views and report in terms of gaps, progress, and challenges in their inclusion in achieving the SDGs under the theme of leaving no one behind as one of the priority areas of the regional map. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We now would like to invite the representative of Northeast Affected Area Development Society.
Respected Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen, I am Tirtha Prasad Saikia, representing Northeast Affected Area Development Society, Assam of Northeast India, and speak here on behalf of the constituency of people affected by conflict and disaster of APRCM. Asia Pacific faces natural and man-made disaster more than any other region. In addition to the risk posed by natural hazard, many of the poor in this region live in countries affected by political instability, civil conflict, weak governance, and economic insecurity. Besides, almost half of the ongoing armed interested conflicts in the world today are fought in this region. In particular, indigenous people are struggling for self-determination and liberation. There is increasing militarization in our communities that often lead to many forms of human rights violations. These are rooted in the corporate capture of resources that breed huge social and economic inequalities and injustice. These phenomena are the result of neoliberal economic model that prioritize corporate profit over people's welfare and the environment, and weaken poor and the underdeveloped countries' capacity to respond timely and effectively to peoples caught in conflict and disaster. Respected Chair, we recommend that these systemic barriers are recognized and addressed in favor of people demanding economic and social justice and accountability. In particular, we urge that disaster preparedness, management, and risk reduction be prioritized and be an integral part of all development plan and policies and public and private actors. Importantly, specific actions should be included in the regional roadmap. Push for greater innovation in risk reduction and disaster risk financing for community in the vulnerable countries. In Asia Pacific, local communities are always the first responders. So, humanitarian crisis management and response must be strengthened through community-based approaches that build on resilience and local capacities. Promote community institution among people living in the predominantly disaster-prone areas of the region and promote resilience-building convergence model of mobilizing risk-prone communities, strengthening people's traditional coping strategy, understanding localized disaster context, geography, and in accordance to that, preparing to that mitigation measures with people's participation. Strengthen GO-NGO protocol to bring about transparency in relationship between government and NGO to provide a way of optimizing the effective, purposeful, and timely coordinated functioning in all phases of disaster management. Government should recognize the emergence of water-induced hazards like riverbank erosion and land degradation as disaster, posing serious problems for states like Assam, the northeastern part of India, and resulting in a massive displacement of people in Brahmaputra and Barak River Basin. In closing, we demand a people-led disaster risk and reduction mechanism founded in the development justice. With this, I would like to conclude my statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I now would like to invite the representative of the Dalit NGO Federation.
Respected Chair, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I am Bhakta Vishwakarma from Dalit NGO Federation of Nepal, representing the Dalit constituency with the APRCM. I would like to thank you, Mr. Chair and ESCAP, for this opportunity. Empowering people and ensuring equality, inclusiveness is only possible if we strengthen the mechanism to transaction, exchange experiences of countries towards the regional and further global level. Issues of most marginalized community like Dalit, indigenous people, people with disability, migrant worker, including plantation worker and LGBTI, could only be possible with the partnership of countries, private sector, including businesses and CSOs from region to representation in the global level. Inequalities within is the key issues for grassroots communities like Dalit and discriminated based on work and descent, including plantation worker. The barriers of representation and limitation in participation in the SDG process, even after continuing more than counting more than 220 million in this region. Further, transaction of information between countries influence the underdevelopment of such communities. While there are many countries thinking positive steps towards breaking the barriers of inequality within, the best practices are often not shared for effective and constructive addressing of the issues. These issues have also led to lack of disaggregated data for means of implementation in the national level. The efficient of and updated disaggregated data is often the challenges for the state, especially communities like Dalits and discriminated based on work and descent. We would like request for mechanism for incorporating community prospective data collection within the SDG system nationally and globally. Financing on Leave No One Behind has been nominal through cherry-picking targets and indicators, which has not really addressed the historic transformative change ambition by SDG. Thus, we request for targeted programs and budgeting for those populations by the member states and financing stakeholders. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
With that, I thank you all for your contributions and for an excellent segment. Now we will transition to agenda item 4, other matters. I'm asking the distinguished delegates of members and associate members if any other matters that need to be discussed. Well, I see none, and I thank you for this insightful and interesting exercise and for an excellent session. Before we leave, I would like to invite our MC to make any announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for a very productive day. Tomorrow, we invite you to join a number of side events and visit the engagement space on the first floor starting from 9 a.m. Please find more information on the side events and the engagement space online at the main APFSD webpage and on our touchscreens. The SDG Help Desk is now 1 year old, developed in partnership with 50 UN agencies, think tanks, and global and regional knowledge providers, and visitors are increasing daily. We are inviting you to mark this celebration by joining us at the engagement space tomorrow at 2 p.m. All participants who have not yet spoken to our volunteers to calculate their carbon emissions, kindly do take a few minutes tomorrow morning to take the short survey. We can only offset our meeting emissions with your input. Thank you. We will reconvene for consideration of agenda item 5 tomorrow at 3 p.m. in this conference room. The draft report and chair's summary will be available for review by delegations on the APFSD website from 2 p.m. tomorrow. We encourage you to view the documents digitally via your laptops or handheld devices rather than printing. Thank you for your kind attention and enjoy the rest of your evening.
With that, Excellencies, I close the session for today.